Well, Mitchell Bebbs, my son-in-law, asked me to record the events that occurred on the Project Magnet aircraft I was on, which crashed at McMurdo in the Antarctic. So here it goes. This is the report I wrote to explain what happened to the office. Project Magnet aircraft was a Lockheed Constellation 1049 Super Constellation operated by VXN-8. The crew that day totaled 23 members, consisting of 18 military from VXN-8, 4 civilian scientists from the Hydrographic Office, and a commander from the Royal Australian Navy, a military observer on this particular flight. It was on a survey flight from Christchurch, New Zealand to McMurdo, Antarctica, when it was involved in the crash landing at Williams Field, McMurdo, Antarctica. Williams Field was built on a sea ice about 6 miles from McMurdo Base, which was located on a small land ridge next to the sea ice. We left the total intensity trace on and recorded the crash, which lasted almost 1 minute. I need to pause here to explain how the Navy constructs runways on the sea ice. The runways at McMurdo were built by removing the snow from the ice surface, blowing it back in other words, grinding the ice surface and adding fresh water, allowing it to freeze to provide a smooth landing surface for the aircraft. This means you are essentially landing in a ditch about 15 feet deep and almost 200 feet wide. The intersection of the 2 main runways, the snow was from both runways rises to 25 feet in height. The aircraft touched down at about 95 knots and 600 feet short of the active runway, and the left main mount, or landing gear, struck a barrel which marked the end of the runway. The barrel was frozen into the ice and it broke off the left main mount, or landing gear. The aircraft settled down to the sub and all hell broke loose. The stub, digging in the ice, violently vibrated the aircraft, turning it off the runway to the left. We plowed into the frozen barrels, marking the edge of the runway. One flew up over the wing and hit the center vertical stabilizer, shearing it off. A violent vibration stopped when the landing gear stub broke off, or the left wing separated from the fuselage. I'm not sure what happened. At that time, the other main mount and nose landing gear must have broken off. We slid sideways on the aircraft belly for about a half mile before coming to the cross runway. At the intersection of the cross runway, we were going about 50-60 knots with the right wing pointing in the direction of the slide. We slid over the 25-foot embankment, flopped down with a loud bang across the runway, and then up over the second 25 feet embankment, and down with another loud bang. That is when the main breakup of the aircraft occurred, breaking the aircraft fuselage in 4 pieces, shearing off the 3 remaining engines and the right tip tank. We came to a rest several hundred feet after crossing the main runway intersection, with all the debris sliding along with the aircraft. The aircraft was filled with objects flying from left to right in the direction of the deceleration. I observed Frank Waits, an enlisted man who were strapped to a pair of seats that broke loose when we slammed down after crossing the first 25-foot embankment. As a pair of seats broke loose, it did a slow rotation and landed upside down on the passengers across the aisle. We were still sliding when all this happened in the relative motion inside the aircraft. The fuselage was broken in 4 places on the right side of the aircraft, and the leading and trailing edge of the wing, on both sides of the cargo hatch. The aircraft was really coming apart at the fuselage, and the fuselage was starting to roll. The crash crew parked across the main runway down in the 25-foot ditch, which formed the active runway as we slid by. Had they parked on the other side of the active runway, we would have slid right over them. When we came to rest, it was incredibly still. We quickly made our way out of the aircraft, stepped onto the snow as it was now ground level outside the door, which is normally 15 feet high. I heard what sounded like a stream of water, and I discovered a 3-inch pipe broken off, and it was pouring 145 gas out on the ice. The crash crew came up and emptied their fire extinguisher bottle on the hot engine number 2, where the gas was pouring out of the left broken wing. As the survivors assembled outside the aircraft to count the crew members, we discovered that 2 flight engineers were missing. The crew chief discovered them jamming underneath the flight engineer's desk, which is on the deceleration side of the aircraft, and both were found unconscious. The flight crew managed to remove the flight engineers as a helicopter landed to pick up the survivors. The helicopter came in several times to relay survivors to the hospital at McMurdo. They were immediately air evacuated to Christchurch, New Zealand. The injured were all in the front section of the aircraft. The uninjured crew members, both civilian and military, were in the aft section of the aircraft. A curious thing happened, which we noted later. When the helicopter landed very near us with the snow blowing and the engine and the blade noise, several of the crew members did not remember the coming and goings of the helicopters. They apparently were in a state of shock after the crash. The Navy rushed several doctors over to the mess hall near the crash site to examine the rest of the flight crews. I remember that one of the doctors was an admiral in the inspection tower of the medical facilities, the VX6. He must have had more doctors with him, so that's why there are so many doctors there. The Navy also dispatched several officers to interview the crew about what we knew of the events before the crash. We were separated out so that we couldn't talk among ourselves about what happened, so they could get a true picture of what happened during the crash. We were then quartered with enlisted Air Force personnel near the crash at the site at Williams Field. The Hydro crew members stayed a few extra days to salvage equipment off the aircraft and shipped it back to Hydro in Suitland, Maryland. We returned to Suitland via MATS and commercial air from San Francisco, California, after the flight crew departed. These are the events as they happen and as we deduce from looking at the wreck the next day. To the best of my ability and my knowledge, these events are accurate considering the circumstances. The wreck took place on October 31, 1960 at 0634 Zulu, or Greenwich Mean Time, or 1830, which is 6:34 in the afternoon in local time. McMurdo is 12 hours ahead of Greenwich Mean Time in London, England. The hydrographic personnel are George Lorentzen, Party Chief, geophysicist Frank Waits, Jim Crow, and Bill David.
Very good.